Hey, everybody, welcome back to another episode of the Catholic Talk Show. Today, we're going to be talking about the 7 worst popes of all time.
Yeah, these 7 popes were shockingly terrible people, murderers and fornicators and people of no faith and even heretics.
From best to worst, here are the worst.
All right, guys, back in the New Catholic Studios with Father Rich and Ryan. And I mean, this is, definitely not the most glorious show we've had, but definitely, something we got to look at for some reason or another because we've got a topic about it,
Well, I think it's important to recognize that the church is built of people, and some people are excellent people and other people not so much. And that goes just as much for the person who sits on the chair of St. Peter as it does for the people who sit in the pews.
It's true.
So, to avoid recognizing or realizing that even some of the popes were bad, I think would be a lie about the church that we would tell ourselves. And coming to terms with some of these bad popes, I think might even help us come to terms with some of the scandals we face in our own times.
It's very clear that God pursues our humanity and he calls us to holiness. Some of us respond to the call.
Others, not so much.
Others become the worst pope of all time.
Yeah. And here are the lucky number 7. Yeah, man. It's true, though. I mean, Christ calls a sinner. And, none of us are perfect. And we will be exploiting these 7 popes throughout the history of the church to really underscore.
They brought that on themselves.
They did. They chose
Your
this.
legacy speaks for itself, and we're going to expose that today. I think another thing, too, is the gates of hell won't prevail against the Catholic Church. And I don't know, through all this sifting of displays of humanity that we don't really appreciate.
That was so diplomatic. These displays of humanity.
Yeah.
I mean, it is. We fight principalities. We don't fight, we hate the sin, not the sinner. But man, somebody who's a pope that gets into that position and has some of the things that we're going to be talking about today.
I think for a lot of non-Catholics, they would think, oh no, every Catholic thinks every pope is perfect and infallible, can never make a mistake. And, if you're a non-Catholic listening, by the end of this episode, you're going to realize that we Catholics don't believe that, and we recognize that there have been some terrible popes. But the fact that there have been terrible popes, for me, is one of the proofs of the real
true presence of Jesus Christ
in the church. Because look, if these terrible popes couldn't have destroyed it from the inside, I don't know who could have. And I think that's a testament to the fact that the Holy Spirit is protecting the church.
And that's my only consolation as a priest, to be perfectly honest, is that this is Christ's church. And I can't believe, I am so humbled every time that I step foot in front of a sanctuary to celebrate Mass or to put on the collar, because I certainly, I can't even imagine how God has brought me to this point in my life where I am a priest, one, but two, I don't feel like I have the power to hold something together, let alone like a small community of people, let alone a church, So relying on the advocacy that we have in the Holy Spirit, relying on the deposit of faith of Jesus Christ, that is the reason why the Catholic Church is still here today. There's no question in my mind that if every type of legal system has failed in every respective sovereign nation up until this point, and that the one legal system established by Christ and commissioned in canon law throughout the years is still intact and holding together and governing the largest population of people in the world, something's to be said about that.
There is. Again, just the fact of how terrible these particular popes were and how just pedestrian and average other popes were. It is just a testament to the fact that this church is divinely guided, because otherwise us people would have ruined it a long time ago. It would not be here 2,000 years later.
For sure. So are these popes, are they like old history Roman Catholic Church, or are there any recent
there's
ones?
There's a lot throughout a few periods of history, but the majority of these popes come from one particular area. One particular era. And this era is known by a lot of historians as the pornocracy. It was an era where the popes were consecutively so terrible that almost for a century, it was the low point of the papacy throughout history, for sure. And a lot of them, a lot of these popes were actually all related to each other. Essentially, a very powerful Roman family essentially hijacked the papacy for almost 100 years, and their influence got, through nepotism and bribery and treachery, got a lot of popes on the throne. Now, before we talk about these 7, just, if we're being honest, just trash popes, right? They're trash popes,
non-virtuous, just totally bad behavior.
Yeah, and I'm looking at this list here, and I don't see anybody from, the first few centuries where, 30, 34 popes were martyred.
So it can't be that.
It's not. It's not that era.
I don't think
and it's not our era, because we've had some great popes in our experience of the papacy.
Yeah, I can't say that there's been a bad pope in 150 years.
Yeah,
or even a mundane pope. They've all been, pretty excellent. Now, before we get started, why don't you tell everyone how they can not land on a list of bad Catholic Talk Show followers and get in touch with us?
So if you're concerned about your behavior and you want to be virtuous, make sure that you go to www.catholictalkshow.com. You want to subscribe to us there, because we'll email you and push you notifications so that you're constantly in contact with whatever we're producing or publishing. And certainly we want you to follow us on all of our social media platforms, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, as well as connecting with us through our Patreon app. If you become a patron of ours, you continue to support the show financially and help us to grow to new markets and reach new populaces with these wonderful, terrible things.
Terrible things.
Terrible things.
Isn't that an oxymoron?
Wonderfully terrible.
Impressively terrible.
Impressively terrible. But you're not terrible because you're supporting us. So we thank you so much for joining us for the show. And most certainly, as we begin, we want to give a big shout out to our sponsors, Exodus 90, as well as Covenant Eyes. We love their work in the world, and be sure to check them out at covenanteyes.com. And then when you're there, you can actually type in a beautiful promo code, Catholic Talk, and you get 30 days for free of all their resources, ebooks, and enter into an accountability to overcome porn addiction. And even if you don't have a porn addiction, if you need an ally for your spiritual growth and your growth over the discipline of the flesh, it's a wonderful program for you. And Exodus 90 days of great discipline and prayer, asceticism, to really enter into a deeper fraternity and grow in your faith. So as we grow in our faith here at the Catholic Talk Show, sometimes, we always kind of turn to good examples, but I think sometimes we learn via negativa as well. So what is the negativa, and which pope are we going to first?
You find virtue through those who don't have it.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's easier to say what you are by defining what you aren't.
Yes.
And if you can put yourself in contrast to these 7,
good for you.
Absolute stinkers, man. Just again, trash popes.
Yeah.
These are the raccoons and of the Pope world. They're terrible.
What do you have against raccoons?
Yeah, man.
They're trash pandas, man. They tear my
Dude,
stuff up.
Garbage. They like the garbage.
Yeah, they tear my garbage.
Well, you
man.
want to pet a raccoon? We'll
Yeah,
get one on the
dude.
next show.
Yeah, okay, there you go.
We'll bring one on the next show.
You
and see
remember
what you
Alf?
like.
You remember when Will Ferrell was going up to the little raccoon? He wanted to hug him.
Yeah, and then
Yeah,
when he
it
bit his
didn't work
face.
out very well,
dude.
did it?
That's how I got bit by that dog on Good Friday, man. I mean, it's like, oh, come here, big guy.
Oh, this happened this year? Did that happen this year? The
Yeah.
dog bit
You
you?
must have really
So this is
fell short
after
in your
you
penance.
defended their integrity and their honor and said they go to heaven?
And then he bit me. It was true. Actually, after I said that dogs go to heaven,
That's when you got bit.
That's a sign.
literally. So not the
Let that
adoption
be-
anymore. This junkyard dog, this big old sandlot junkyard dog.
So you know what you should have called that dog?
What's that?
Stephen VI.
Is that the Pope that we're going to?
That's the first one we're going to talk about.
See, but I still have like compassion for the dog that bit
Well,
me.
Stephen
'cause he
VI
was a
compassion
beat
for
dog.
Pope Stephen
no,
VI.
and you know what? Stephen VI would not have compassion for you. Do you know why? Do you know what he would do after he bit you to death?
He would deep finger me.
Yeah, he would dig you up and put you on trial.
Oh, this is that Pope.
This is
The
that
cadaver
Pope.
synod.
Oh,
Yes.
no.
So Pope Stephen VI, he was Pope from 896 to 897. Not a long pontificate.
No.
Oh.
But he was one of the members of this clan of Theophylactus of Tusculum. Now, Theophylactus of Tusculum basically was the power broker of Rome in the late 9th and early 10th century, and he was essentially the de facto ruler of Rome. And his descendants and the people he decided were going to be the Pope ended up being the Pope. And Stephen VI was one of the members of that clan, but Formosus was not. So to kind of invalidate Formosus, Stephen VI had him dung up, put on trial, accused of heresy, and found guilty, stripped of his papal vestments, defingered, and then thrown in the river.
Now, why the defingerment?
Because these are the fingers that the Pope would use to bless.
Oh.
So if you chop those boys off, there's no more blessing for good Pope Formosus.
Was he like,
Even in the grave.
was he all bones or was he still flesh?
Well, I mean, this is only like a year later, so he was probably just, a puffy,
That's just
gross
a
mess.
smelly synod.
Yeah,
That's
it is.
nasty.
It's not good.
Yeah.
So he did this, and well, obviously, not a good Pope.
What a terrible Pope.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I mean, could you imagine?
Hating somebody in the grave that much?
Right,
But what a terrible name. Theophylactus.
Theophylactus. Yeah, he
Sounds
was
like a disease.
Yeah. You got that Theophylactus?
Hey, what are you
Yeah.
taking?
You know they
for
make
your
a cream. They make a
Theophylactus?
cream for that.
Yeah, I
The
didn't wash my
Theophylactus
hands
cream.
after going to that. And never mind. Yeah. When you catch Theophylactum, you typically, if you get it on your hands, you have to get defingered. That's so stupid.
Oh, poor Formosus.
Yeah, Formosus.
Formosus,
Now,
man.
Formosus was actually. We did an episode where we talked about
We
about the cadaver sin in much more detail. But Formosus was saved from the rivers by good nuns and given a holy burial, where they said that the scent of sanctity and miracles occurred at his grave.
Wow.
Now, the story doesn't end so good for Stephen VI. He was
Was he
deposed.
killed?
He was
Post Formosus?
well, Formosus, no, he died of natural causes.
Okay.
But Stephen VI wanted to make sure that the people that he had named bishop were invalidated, and the only way to do that was to accuse him formally of heresy, which would invalidate the acts of his papacy.
And take his fingers away, too.
And then
That's a
that
very
way-
important
there
part
it
of
is.
that.
What do he do with his fingers?
I don't know. Ugh.
So it didn't end well for Stephen VI, though. About a year later, after the synod, he was. Some people say that he was strangled to death by the jealous husband of his lover in a bed. So this dude caught the Pope in bed with his wife and strangled him to death.
Who was that?
Stephen VI.
He did. Oh, wow.
Yeah, he got choked out.
Wow.
I'll tell you what, man. Consequences.
Let me just say that's no Pope Francis or Benedict or John Paul II.
No.
I mean, could you imagine that going on now?
Oh, man.
It's a different age, man.
Yeah, the information flies a little bit too fast. They're going to be a little bit more careful. It's not as centralized in Rome as it was back then, where Rome was like the powerhouse of.
Yeah, and everyone's got the Theophylactus.
Yeah. You don't want that.
No, I
Your
don't want
fingers and everything.
No.
And a lot of cream buzzing around.
So this next pope, again, in the age of the pornocracy, he was pope from 1032, and then again in 1045,
Can I ask you a question?
and then again in 1047.
So,
What's a pornocracy?
That was just a way to describe that 100-year period of terrible popes.
Okay.
The papacy, and this is because it was obscene. It
Gotcha.
was so obscene that they labeled that era the pornocracy.
Okay.
Now, this particular pope, he was pope. He was elected pope on October 1032, April 1045, and November 1047.
3 times?
He is the only person to ever have been pope 3 times. Benedict IX. And do you know what his birth name was? Theophylacticus of Tusculum.
Oh, man.
No way.
Yes.
Did he get the cream?
No, he was one of these. He was a member of this clan, of this family.
Oh, man.
Whoa.
These guys are like that trash family that moves in next door to you and like works on trucks and leaves tires everywhere and blasting music and garbage everywhere.
Do you know what I'm thinking of? Is like the phylactery, Theophylacticus, that they put the phylactery on
No,
top of the
it's not that.
theology.
It's not that,
and
though.
it's just wrong,
It's just-
man.
It's phylactitis.
Galactitis.
So anyway, Benedict the Ninth.
What?
Never mind. So
Never mind.
well, a thought occurred to me, but
I'm glad that you refrained.
I did. Benedict the Ninth.
He was 20 years old when he was elected
I
the
know.
Pope.
He was 20 years
He
old.
wasn't even elected the Pope.
They just basically
Pulled
paid-
fingers.
pulled fingers. He's basically had his way. He was bribed into office. He just people, his family bribed the cardinals, and since they were so powerful, they got him into office when he was 20 years old. But he got bored with being Pope. So do you know what he did?
Oh gosh.
Do you know what he did when he got bored with being Pope? He sold the right to be Pope to his godfather. And he
Pope John the 19th.
Yeah. Pope John. Yeah, Pope John the 19th.
Yeah. Okay.
So again, Pope John the 19th, only because he's only tangential to this story, doesn't land on this list. But again,
He's up there.
he's a guardian
Yeah.
Pope.
I mean, he looks like a pretty rough dude.
Right. But that was his godfather, and he's just like, I'm bored with this poping thing. You want to buy it from me? And he sold the papacy to his godfather. Now, he decided that, again, 2 years later, that he wanted to be Pope again. So he pressed his rights and reclaimed the throne. And then he decided he didn't want to be Pope again.
Did he sell it again?
No, he just, I think, walked away from it, and then there's an anti-pope, and he was driven out of the city. And then he's like,
And didn't he call like a battle and like he fought?
came into Rome
Yeah.
and fought against one of the other popes and came back and then took it for a third time. So St. Peter Damian called him
This is in like the course of 4 years.
4 years.
So I mean, this guy
Like,
is
dude,
like,
make up your mind.
yeah. I mean, this is a 20-year-old guy.
Yeah, but he's
Yeah.
he's a young buck.
Yeah. No.
just-
Yes. No. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. All
Yeah,
right.
not good. St. Peter Damian, a great saint and a great reformer. And in our day and age, with the things that the church is dealing with now, reading the works of St. Peter Damian, I highly recommend
Yeah,
it.
it's tremendous.
I won't even get into it, but you should read it. Now, St. Peter Damian said that Benedict IX, or Theophylacticus of Tusculum, was a demon from hell in the disguise of priest. He was that bad.
Wow.
He sold the papacy 3 times. Now, this one kind of has a decent story, to an end to the story, where he ended up being exiled after that third time in the chair, right? And he was exiled, and he was never kind of had an opportunity to come back into power.
He
And
repented, didn't he?
He,
And then,
he
lived
ended up getting banished to a monastery,
yeah,
and-
monastic life.
and that monastic life straightened him out, and he ended up dying in repentance of all the things that he
Yeah.
did while Pope.
I remember
Wow.
Yeah.
That's great. So it's a bad papacy, but not
Yeah.
there was some salvation in
that. So
all
a
that.
terrible Pope turned out to be a good guy at the end.
Praise
Because he
God.
recognized his fault.
Praise God.
So another Pope on our list who is, again,
One of the worst popes of all time.
just terrible Pope. Not a good Pope.
What was Ryan Delacroix's Pope name?
If Ryan Delacroix was Pope, he'd be Pope Paul VI II.
Yeah, that's right. Pope Paul VI II.
That's really dumb. So we have now Pope John XII. Now, he was related to the Count of Tusculum and a member of the Roman Theophylactus family.
Get
Those
out.
Theophylacti, man.
Dude, his pontificate was infamous for depravity and worldliness.
I'm not surprised with those Theophylacti.
Yeah, seriously. I mean, look, Catholics, talk to your children about the Theophylactuses before someone else does, because they find out they're
Otherwise, just get the cream.
people are going to be,
Modern medicine. I mean,
That's
we've
it.
got a cure for it.
Yeah.
his reputation was so bad that there was some contemporary accounts of his life that he would celebrate mass in horse stables, that he had an affair with a widow. He had an affair with his father's concubine. He had an affair with his own niece.
Who would have an affair with his father's concubine?
A Theophylactus.
Theophylactus. These guys are just the hillbillies of Rome, man.
Oh, man. And literally the hills of Rome. That's probably where they come from.
Well, it is. Tusculum was a small hill city outside of Rome in Latium.
How did they get so much power if they were in this small little town out there?
Money, influence, and cunning, I guess.
Oh.
So they said that his pontificate was so bad that the Lateran Palace, everyone called it the brothel. It was that bad. He blinded his confessor after because he didn't like the penance he gave him.
Oh my gosh.
He threw a cardinal out the window after castrating him because he didn't like it. He set fires randomly to buildings around town. Let's see. It was said that he would toast to the devil when drinking wine. They said when he was playing dice, he would invoke Jupiter and Venus. He said he didn't celebrate the office, the liturgy of the hours, and he wouldn't make the sign of the cross.
Liturgy of the hours. It's like you're obliged to that.
Yeah.
That's the
the office.
Yeah. Okay. So now some of these things probably, these are written by political opponents of the Theophylactus. So are all of these things true? Maybe, maybe not. But typically when there's smoke, there's fire. And his papacy was just renowned for being just one of the low points of the entire church history. And when the Lateran Palace is called a straight up whorehouse, things are bad.
Oh yeah.
I mean,
yeah, and he died when he was like 40 years old too. Not even 40.
I don't think that that's necessarily out of character, but the fact that he had
We're out of the norm
of that era. But being Pope that young and dying that young, he probably lived hard and partied and burnt himself out. But
pun intended, because he was burning all sorts of stuff.
He was like Motley Crue or something.
Yeah, man. What a pyromaniac.
Pope Vince Neil. Wow.
The Theophylacti.
Yeah. Theophylacti,
well,
man.
Are they woven into all these bad popes? This
Most of them this list, because this was the most terrible, from 950s to the 1080s. I mean, this was all the popes, for the most part, were elected and put in place by the Theophylactus family. Not so
Now,
good.
Is there anybody else in the family of the Theophylacti?
I'm sure there is.
That were popes?
Why don't we then?
Because that's going to span only like maybe half.
Okay, so why don't we talk then about another one of the 7 worst popes of all time?
Okay.
Pope Sergius III.
Sergius III.
Yes.
Sergius.
Now, he was a Theophylactus.
Really?
Yes. And
starting to see a common thread here.
Yeah.
So he had ties. He was not a Theophylactus, but he was tied politically to the family. But the Theophylactus were like, he's Pope. What should we do to get him further into the fold? I got an idea. So Theophylactus's daughter, Mariotza, was offered to the Pope Sergius III as his lover, and Pope Sergius III accepted because that was forming a bond between his papacy and the Theophylactus family. And he had a child out of wedlock with Mariotza. And do you know who that child became?
The Pope.
Pope John XI.
Is he on the list?
Oh my God.
Well, these two are tied together.
Up, man.
Theophylactus's his son-in-law by bastard marriage, I don't even know how that works out, and his grandson, they're tied together. So Sergius III was the father of John XI, who were both essentially Theophylactus popes.
So if my brothers and sisters, if you're out there thinking your family's the worst, just think, at least you don't have it like the Theophylactuses.
I mean,
can make a cream for that, you know?
One of them converted, so that's
at least
good.
one of them converted.
I mean, can we just go ahead and make the assumption that the Theophylacti, which I think is the plural of Theophylactus,
it is the plural, yeah.
We're the worst family in the history of the church.
Without a doubt.
Yeah. I don't know. The Medicis were pretty bad too.
No, the Medicis there's awesome Medicis.
There are the deposit that family has left on the church in art and in the inspiration of architecture
because of the Reformation. But the Medicis there was a lot of
powerful
awesome
family.
Powerful
and
family.
powerfully influenced good in many different respects.
Sure, there's bad ones. No Theophylactus is.
If you know a Theophylactus out there that is a good leader,
or a good person, who's just not out kicking
or even
dogs
had a
and
good
spitting on
moment.
widows.
If you know a Theophylactus,
I mean, I would have been.
Yeah, we want to bring a Theophylactus
I wonder
on
what
the
the
show.
Theophylactus are doing today. I mean, dude. Although, guys, maybe we should roll this back because if there's still Theophylactus
They may
out
be
there,
coming after us.
they're gonna come after you and they're gonna slash your tires.
Hey, man.
Pull your beard out, break your glasses, steal my computer. Man, they're shady folk.
They may be coming after us,
Yeah,
man.
that's not good.
What's the years of separation? So when was the last Theophylacti Pope?
Well, the last Theophylactus was Pope Benedict IX, right? That one that Peter Damian said was a pope, a demon from hell in the shape of a
he's the one that
priest.
sold the
And what year
papacy.
was that?
That was in 1048.
Wow.
So
we've got a little bit of time. So there's no Theophylacti coming after us unless
I don't know.
they've been underground.
They might have a new name.
So if I'm looking at this, I'm looking at the family tree of the Theophylactus, of Theophylactus I, Count of Tusculum,
Yes.
and his wife Theodora, who was
Yes.
the one pulling a lot of the power plays, and their daughter Mariotza, who had a child with Pope Sergius III, who begat John the 11th.
What's begat mean?
Was the parents of.
Oh, okay.
So we have.
What if I found out that the Theophylactus begat like a Pagano somewhere along the line?
It's
What if I go
possible.
on Ancestry.com and find
Dude,
out
that would
I'm
explain
related?
so much. All right.
Repent.
Repent. I will repent right now
So
for the sins of my father.
from 904, so Theophylactus really came into power with that merging of his family and Pope Sergius III through that arranged, whatever you call that, with his
Begatting.
daughter, which begat popes.
Begat.
So let's say that's the beginning of their kind of the pornocracy, which would be 904, 905. So from there up until 1048 of the Theophylacti, you had Sergius III, John the 11th, John the 12th, Benedict the 7th, John the 13th, Benedict the 8th, John the 19th, and Pope Benedict the 9th.
That's 8, and we're covering 7.
Yeah. And now they are not all on this list. Some of them were just kind of,
They're not as egregious.
They're not
Where
as
are we
egregious.
out? How many have we covered?
we've covered 4.
4.
Yeah.
Wow.
So that's a lot of bad
That's
popes.
how many syllables there are on Theophylactus.
Theophylactus.
Oh,
5.
let's see, we're on the 5th now.
Yeah. You're the Theophylactus of math.
Oh, yeah.
So yeah, I
I'm a
mean, really,
wordsmith.
that family in that era that has produced. Look, I could easily say that any of those 8 popes might potentially be on this list, but those 4 for sure, right? Those other
Whoa.
ones might have had some redeeming qualities, but that era is just absurdly bad, and that's called the pornocracy. There's a great book by actually a writer that I have a ton of respect for, Charles Colomb, and he wrote a book called The Vicars of Christ. And he actually helped me compile and research this list. He helped me, number one, I've read his book probably 15 times. It's an awesome book. Just go out and buy it. If you want to learn the history of popes, read it. But in trying to pick this list of worst popes and trying to sort through the absolute dung heap of the Theophylacti popes, he helped me identify these 4 and a couple other ones that we'll get to. But a shout out to Charles Colomb and his book, Vicars of Christ.
Here's a moral reprobate, like a little moral fervorindo, if you will. Don't be a Theophylactus, okay? That's
Yeah.
the moral
Father
of the
Rich.
story.
Are you? Is this your repentance for being one in
Well,
the Ancestry.com?
Once I find once I find
I
out,
took a 23andMe. It says I'm a Theophylactus.
I just gave him my spit.
What does
Now
that
I'm a
even mean?
Theophylacti.
gave him my spit.
That's so dumb.
I just found out I'm a Theophylacti. I'm gonna go
gosh.
cry myself in a cave somewhere, be monastic for the rest of my life.
All right, so let's get out of the muck and the wallow of the hills of Tusculum, where
Gosh, please.
Lord, things happen that shouldn't happen.
Can we have other like tragedies without this family?
Yeah,
I mean,
let's
isn't
move
there,
on to
isn't
another
there
family
anything
that's terrible.
independent from these people?
All right, let's roll it back before the time of the Theophylactum. Let's go back to Pope Honorius I. Now, I almost feel like, man, some of these popes are just so pedestrianly bad that after the Theophylactus, it's hard to top. But Honorius was actually anathematized. He was a pope who was legitimately anathematized after his death.
What is anathematized?
Anathematized.
Anathemasit.
It means that he was declared just
A heretic?
Well, anathema.
He was deposed, essentially.
Oh, they kicked him out?
Well, no, this happened after his death, and anathema is basically a formal declaration by the church that you cannot hold this position or follow the teaching of this person.
So
it was kind of like
teachings.
It was kind of like the guy that exhumed the dead guy and broke his, defingered him and everything.
In a similar way, yeah.
But actually like a legitimate church.
So in the Sixth Ecumenical Council, which was the Third Council of Constantinople, which was a universally accepted council by both the East and the West, and even like Anglicans and stuff. I mean, this was an accepting council. He was Honorius was particularly anathematized for his support, or at least at the very worst, depending on the way you read the documents, for his purposeful silence in the face of the heresy of the Monothelites.
Monothelites?
Monothelites. Monothelites. That one just, it's hard to say.
Monothelites.
Monothelite. Do. Monothelite.
Monothelite.
I'm sure our listeners are okay with that. Hey, it's not important.
Monothelite. That's really dumb. Again, man, we're in a dumb mood today.
Yeah, we are. It's in a goofy mood right now.
So yeah, no, this is one of the only popes who had ever been anathematized for a specifically heretical view by a council of the church. Now, it happened after his death, but still, that lands you on the list of bad popes. And honestly, when they were debating in the First Vatican Council in 1870 the dogma of papal infallibility, Pope Honorius was one of the big stumbling blocks to the definition of that, because they're like, if a pope can be anathematized, then how can the pope always have that sort of guarantee of papal infallibility? And they said that, and they worked that out at the council, but they had to really study this matter because of, the nature of the beliefs of this pope. So for that, Honorius, you get to stand next with all the Theophylactuses.
Not a company I would want to keep.
It's not it. So don't be a monothelite.
Or an Honorius.
Do.
Next up on the wonderful list of 7 worst popes in history.
Hey, this is Brother Rich Pagano, and I'm here with Q104 Power the One, and this
AM
is
station.
And for your oh man, we are in a dumb mood.
We are.
That's
I'm
great,
enjoying it.
It's good.
Hopefully you're enjoying it at home.
All right, so next on our list of terrible popes, Pope Julius III.
Not to be confused with Julius II, who was the warrior pope.
That's
who
right.
was a total bad to the bone.
Shut your mouth.
Shut your mouth. I'm only talking about Julius II.
only
But
talking
Julius III.
Talk about Julius II.
Julius III. So he was terrible?
Julius III is one that might hit a little bit too close to home for what we are experiencing in the church today.
Really?
Yes.
Really?
So Pope Julius III, the big scandal of his papacy was his relationship with his nephew.
Oh, Lord.
Yes. It wasn't his nephew. It was a street beggar named Innocenzo. And apparently this Innocenzo guy, good-looking kid, right? Very good-looking, very handsome young man. And he was the son of a beggar, a homeless woman. And he was noticed in the streets for being ostensibly good-looking. And he was adopted by this Giovanni Del Monte, who would eventually become Pope Julius III. And everyone said, okay, well, maybe they were trying to be charitable. Maybe he's just really, truly showing care for a street person. But it didn't stop there where he just adopted him. He issued a papal bull where he legitimatized him. Because in that society, you could not be an illegitimate child and have the rights of succession or even inheritance. But it didn't end there. At 19 years old, so he adopted him at 14 years old, and after he legitimatized him, at 19 years old, he named him a cardinal of the church.
Oh my gosh.
And everyone,
was he the next pope we're going to be talking about?
No, this is Julius III. So then he
Turning my stomach.
he turned him into a cardinal. And then they found out that he could barely read and was terrible at his job. So what do? You name him the Secretary of State of the Vatican.
Wow.
Yeah, he can't read.
Yeah. And everyone knew, and like everyone's like, oh yeah, they sleep in the same bed together.
God bless.
Yeah. And his name, like, oddly enough, is Innocenzo.
Yeah.
Like innocence of a child or
Innocenzo
ripped
Del
away from
Monte. Yeah. But it seems that Innocenzo wasn't so innocent himself, although I'm going to be completely fair and candid here. After what I can only presume was the grooming and sexual abuse of a street child by a very powerful person, you can't excuse his acts that he committed later in life, but you can certainly understand why they happened.
He was probably warped out the yin.
Well, I mean, if you look at
know?
the impact of sexual abuse on people who have experienced in the last 50 years or 100 years in our church, you'll see that the people who experience sexual abuse at the hands of clergy are uniquely and terribly broken by it. And that's why it's such a particularly egregious offense.
And scandalous offense.
Scandalous and just
Talk
disgusting.
about a stumbling block. You're at the doors of mercy. You're at the fonts of forgiveness and the fonts of salvation. And you are subverting that whole plan of salvation by a complete, terrible, horrific, selfish act and a manipulation of someone that is developing as a child. It's just, it just turns my stomach, dude.
Yeah, it's
that was just a mood. That was
a
just,
mood killer.
That just killed the whole show right there for me, man.
Yeah. I was hoping we'd talk about the Theophylactus.
No, it didn't end well for Innocenzo. He was actually in prison because he ended up murdering 2 people, and he was also accused of rape, and then he died in prison.
The kid that was
He was able to remain being a cardinal. Actually, he didn't die in prison. A few cardinals basically bailed him out, and because I get maybe felt bad because they were privy to it back in the day. And it almost feels like to me like hush money, but I think they bailed him out and then moved him to the countryside so he could die in innocence. Or die in peace.
You're driving the whole historical reality of terrible right now.
Yeah.
But it's
we
true.
should have probably finished with that one and then leave everybody depressed. Judas was among the 12, and there's always that poor, that poverty that Jesus identified will always be in the midst of who we are as human beings and people. And I think there's no greater poverty than human sinfulness, especially the egregious sins of the past and our forefathers and also, people in the name of the church doing these terrible things.
Yeah. And I, like I said, we were laughing at the others, and this one hits home because I think there's so many parallels to the things that we're experiencing in the church now.
History, yeah, for sure.
And one is that I think one thing that we could take away from it is that people are always terrible, and there's always these types of things, but that the church survived then, and the church will survive now. But the way the church survived then is by getting rid of people who do things like this and making sure they don't happen. Now, when they do happen, can't cover them up. You can't pretend they don't happen. You have to address them. You have to make it right in any way possible and do things to prevent it from happening again. And until we do that, look, this is not the 1500s. This is 2019. And the way information passes now, the scandal it causes now is so much graver than it caused back then when it was just the gossip of the high society of Roman culture. Now, I mean, these kinds of scandals are killing the spirituality of so many people. So it needs to stop.
Are you going to talk about Pope Urban VI? Because that guy was like mafioso. I don't know.
I don't have him on my list. Why don't you give us a bonus bad pope if he's a bad pope? Oh,
yeah. So like, he had a lot of cardinals conspiring against him to remove him from the papacy.
Okay.
And so his reaction to that was to torture them.
Oh.
And so in the torturing of these cardinals, if they weren't screaming loud enough, he would remove the torture and fire them and bring somebody else in.
That's pretty bad.
That's pretty bad.
Yeah.
That's a definite honorable mention.
Yeah.
Oof, Lord have mercy.
Yeah, he was a monk too.
Wow. Well, I'm just going to actually then put him into place of John the 22nd, who I thought was a pretty bad pope for denying the doctrine of the beatific vision and trying to suppress the Franciscans, which is bad, and he should be on that list.
Suppressing the Franciscans that's
denying
bad.
denying the beatific vision, that when you die, you immediately go to the particular judgment. That's just as bad, though.
That's like a heretical.
Yeah, that's a heretical one, and that's very bad. And heresy is spiritual murder, but that is straight up murder right there.
Right. Yeah. So I mean, this was during the rival factions between the Western Schism and the Avignon Papacy when it came back to Rome, and so there was still a lot of animosity. And I think the way that he controlled his adversaries is definitely not virtuous.
So you know what? Actually, I want to circle back to the Theophylactus, and let's just cap this entire garbage sandwich with a little bit more. little bit more about Sergius III. So some people say that Sergius...
If you're still listening to all of these terrible things.
So Sergius III, some people say that he had the cadaver synod 2 electric boogaloo, and he had Formosus dug up again and beheaded.
What? Formosus was dug up twice?
Some people said that, and that was the belief for hundreds of years. And now,
poor Formosus, man.
No. I need to start praying to that
it's
guy.
like a posthumous
he experienced persecution in the grave.
It's kind of like Pope.
Has anybody ever experienced that kind of
I don't think
persecution
so.
in the grave? I mean, it's just almost
Weekend
impossible.
at Bernie's.
Yeah.
Good
He
point.
wasn't in the grave, though.
Good point.
Did they pull him out of the grave?
He was never put in the grave.
Yeah,
Yeah,
but
He was kept
that's
from
right.
the grave.
Look, I'm just going to say that Weekend at Bernie's is a hour
And he
and a
went to
half.
parties. They took him to parties. They didn't put him on trial and
Yeah, but
remove his
Weekend at
fingers.
Bernie's is an hour and a half of
party.
the desecration of a corpse, and those people should be in jail.
Yeah, that's not good.
Number one for their financial thief.
And we get entertainment out of it?
Yeah. Oh, ha ha. Corpse abuse.
Weekend at Bernie's.
Yeah. I actually say that a lot of times that Ryan Delacrosse is the living Weekend at Bernie's. Can you give the camera a little Weekend at Bernie's?
You just say that because I like to sleep a lot.
Yeah.
So have we reached the summit of the
Garbage sandwich.
I wouldn't call it the summit. I'd say we'd reached the depths.
Yeah.
very
Good find on Urban the
dregs.
Sixth. That's good.
Yeah.
dregs.
I mean, it hurts my soul sometimes to think about that. But I know that Christ is victorious in all of this. And even in the worst pain that people suffer at the hands of others and their reaction to it, even if it is sinful, like God's mercy pervades all of that.
Yeah,
you
that's
know,
absolutely right.
and his understanding surpasses all of our understanding.
Mm-hmm.
And ultimately, our Lord suffered immensely, you know,
Mm-hmm.
and through that suffering, we gain this immensely valuable life, eternal life forever. And so my prayer is like that, you know, people who were harmed by others in this, and you know, even this Pope that converted, right? I mean, like, I rejoiced over that. Like, he caused a lot of damage, but still, like, at the end of his life, you know, he, you know, apparently had some sort of contrition, right? And God reaches out to all of us constantly, and with a love and a power and mercy that we can't even really understand. It's a mystery. And, you know, my hope is that this suffering will end, right? And through the ending of that suffering, that God will bring them to this place of like crowning them as martyrs.
We all
you know?
we all celebrate when a villain changes, you know, and transforms and shows a moment of compassion or a moment of virtue. And, you know, there are a number of television shows out there that
Darth Vader.
Darth Vader, you know, like
Darth
in
Vader.
movies or you know, so
He's the bad guy of the whole series. And in the last 10 minutes, he converts, and then he's a Force ghost that's a good one.
yeah, and that's such an inspiring moment in the film. Or Game of Thrones, you know, you see these character arcs that are so magnificent and,
Except for the last
so
season.
complex. The last season and the last episode were horrible.
The last season was actually written by the Theophylactuses.
That would make so much sense. But you know, when we look at the character arc of any single character throughout history, or even in our own lives, we've done terrible things in our life. it doesn't define us. As St. John Paul II says, sin does not define us. You know, it's the grace of God that is ever holding out patiently for us to convert and to recognize our failure, to recognize our fault. So if there are theophylacti listening into this show, you know, there's still a chance for your bloodline to express this virtue that Christ calls us to.
We should mention our sponsor, Ancestry DNA. No, just kidding. You can find out too if you're a phylacti.
So I'm genuinely interested.
You know, before we go, I got a little bit of a bad Pope move of myself, and I'm going to give you an inquisition.
Well, before we do that, let's just make sure that you're subscribing on all of our platforms. Instagram, Twitter, Facebook. I'm buying some time.
He's buying time.
On top of that, patreon.com/The Catholic Talk Show in order to support us financially so we can get the show out there to new people. Is there anything else that I could? Exodus 90, Covenant Eyes.
Yep.
Sponsors, awesome people. Check out their websites.
Kyle, can we get the Inquisition sign up again? You thought you escaped it, but you didn't.
I've escaped a couple on this bad shoot.
You have. And, you know, this one is not going to be a paradox or a real mind twister or anything that's going to stretch the education that you received
because we've
at
been
the
shooting
seminary.
for like 14 hours.
14 hours. And your brain is no match for a deep question at this point. And I wouldn't do that to you.
Thank you very much.
But I think this is a little bit more of a serious question is, what fidelity does a Catholic owe to a bad pope? If a bad pope is doing things that are obviously contrary to the faith, how should a Catholic respond?
There's a great television series called The Band of Brothers.
Okay.
Right. And General Winters, after all of his successes in the battlefield, was being passed by the guy who basically led them through basic training.
Mm-hmm.
And the guy who led him through basic training was like a total pain in the butt. And, you know, as this guy was passing by who led them through basic,
Mm-hmm.
you know, he wasn't going to salute General Winters. And General Winters turned to him and said, "We salute the office, not the person." And you just see the basic training guy, you know, he saluted General Winters. And I think there's something to be said in that, because a number of people uphold an office of administration. Maybe they're not great, you know, and I'll criticize myself. I'm not a perfect administrator. I strive. I try to learn from the best administrators. I pray for the gift of administration. There's people who are in leadership that are not perfect. And I'm sensitive to that in every respect, whether somebody's seeking counsel or not, or being humble about their office or not. You know, but we salute the office because it is the office and the very structures of our hierarchy that have kept the church intact. So there may be terrible things that happen throughout the history of the church, but next to the sacraments, it's the hierarchical structure and the monarchy of the church that has kept this church intact. And for that deserves every amount of salute and honor.
With the grace of God.
I give it the honor. And I've recognized the underbelly of the church in my own day. I've looked through the history books, and you've helped punch me in the gut all over again. But I will continue
I chopped
to
up your
salute
fingers all over again.
Yeah.
I will continue to salute in every respect the offices of Holy Mother Church. Just minus two fingers.
The 2 finger salute.
The 2 finger salute. So that's how I would answer that question.
I think that's a fair answer. And, you know, one other thing that I would say is that even Benedict IX, that just the Pope that Peter Damon said was a total demon of a person, if he was validly ordained and he properly confected the sacrament of the Eucharist, it's still Jesus Christ in the Eucharist. It's still the true presence. And no bad pope, no bad priest, no bad bishop should be able to separate you from the true head of the church, which is Jesus Christ. So, you know, if you are feeling any distress over, I guess, the situation that the church finds itself in now and has found itself in the past, you know, there's been people throughout history who have felt the same ways that you're feeling now, that maybe the church is just too overcome with difficulty or corruption. Hang on, because it's going to get better, and the Holy Spirit will protect the church, and the gates of hell will not stand against it.
Amen to that. And there is corruption in every single institution, human institution. The difference is we are established in a divine institution.
Yeah, if the sins of another institution raised to the very gates of heaven, it doesn't excuse the single sin of one member of the church.
And that's why every institution and nation throughout history has come and gone.
Mm-hmm.
But the sovereign nation that the lifted banners of Christ's resurrection were raised, those banners still fly.
Yeah.
And there's still people dying for those banners.
Yeah,
and
so,
I'm very proud to be associated with them.
Bad popes, bad priests now. It's always been there, always will be. Don't give a pope. And
the central thing is, don't be a Theophylactus. Seriously.
That's where we're going with all this.
Yeah, the moral of this story is, don't be a Theophylactus. See you next time.
God bless.